Hi, this is a tale told by an idiot, literature podcast by me and my Brazilian friend over here. Today we're
Greetings,
going to be
everyone.
talking about Fernando Pessoa, a Portuguese author born in 1888, born in Portugal, and then he briefly moved to South Africa near the time that Gandhi was there, starting his revolutionary tendencies, and he was educated and then moved back to Portugal and then stayed in Portugal most of his life. He was very successful in school and won an essay contest when he lived in South Africa, in English actually, and he won the whole contest for the district. So he got going pretty early. And even some of his heteronyms, he made them when he was 18, like full heteronyms. But he did start earlier. And a heteronym is basically, he didn't want to use pseudonym because they were more in depth than a pseudonym. They weren't simply a name. He had intricate biographies for each of his heteronyms and even family trees, what their childhood was like, what they studied in university. And at periods in his life, he wrote letters to real people from the perspective of his heteronyms, and he signed them Alvaro de Campos or Alexander Search. And one interesting story, actually, from the selected prose of Fernando Pessoa, when he got out of school and moved to Portugal, he sent letters back to some of his teachers asking what Fernando Pessoa was like, because he said that Fernando Pessoa killed himself and he was posing as a psychologist, and he sent letters to his teachers to give a description of himself. I always thought that was pretty interesting, and that gives an idea of how in depth these heteronyms went. And then, so the big three heteronyms, I'll let you introduce Caeiro.
Okay, but before I introduce Caeiro, I want to talk a little bit more about Pessoa himself. When you were talking about how far he went in the creation of these personas, these heteronyms, he even made some astrological charts. And in order to do that, he had, even though astrology, you can say, oh, it's not a science, it does not work, but you have some information regarding the personality of the person. And when Pessoa was, in one letter, he says, the Campos was born, and he gives the days that I don't remember now, but he says, I'm not sure if this was the day I thought first, but the astrology chart for it makes all the sense with himself, with the Campos. So he kind of tried to make a really reasonable, giving reasonable information about the characters, the personas he made. And
yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, about the heteronyms, he had many. It's over 50, but the three that were most worked on were Alberto Caeiro, Álvaro de Campos, and Ricardo Reis. The first one is Alberto Caeiro. According to Pessoa, in the most famous letters of him, he wrote the letter to Adolfo Casais Monteiro in June of 1935. It is one letter. He explains how his creation process came to be, and he explains the difference of the heteronyms and how he knows that what he wrote belongs to one or other guy. And about Caeiro, he says, in the 8th March of 915, according to Pessoa, he says, appeared in me my master. Like, he kind of, an entity dropped down on him. It's kind of a romanticized version, Pessoa had, but he began to write what would be the Keeper of Ships, the first work of Caeiro. It's basically 30 poems, the first time he wrote was 30 and so poems, according to him, and it shows a keeper of flocks, a keeper of ships. He is a poet of the nature. According to one other heteronymous of Pessoa, Ricardo Reis, Caeiro is the only true poet that ever lived, the only sincere poet, because he wrote what he lived, and he lived what he wrote. And he has kind of a pristine intake of life. He sees life as what it is. For instance, in one of his odes, he says that, in the ode number 5, he says, there is no inner meaning of things. And in other ode that I don't remember the number now, he says that the only mystery of things is that people think about the mystery of things. He dismissed some poets and philosophers. He dismissed what he calls fake poets, which would be the poets that goes great lengths to produce something. They kind of try to find inner meaning or some occult significance in things. Anyhow, Pessoa writes most of Caeiro's work at once in the Triumphal Day, this 8th of March. And what you can see in Caeiro's poetry is a concise vision of the world. You can think it's a kind of childish vision, because he says things like, the only to think is to be sick, or there is no inner meaning of things. He wants to see only, not to see. He thinks the universe, all the universe, is only what you can see and what you can perceive naturally. But even though it may sound childish and naive, it is in reality a kind of intellectual vision intellectual stance of this kind of thought, kind of vision. There is one poem of him, let me get the number here, is the old number 44. He goes on talking about how he was in the night and there was a clock there. And the way the poem builds itself is kind of trying to say that the clock ticking has some superior meaning, because you can see if you are alone in the night and the clock starts ticking and you realize you are alone, there is only darkness outside, and these clocks are a reminder of your situation now. But he goes creating this kind of expectative to the poem to be. But in the end, he says, the only thing that this clock reminds me is the clock ticking. So all his project goes along the way of saying life is simple. There is no inner meaning of things. There is not much to expect. And you need to kind of lay back, see life how it is, to truly experience life. There are a few odes that I think are important of him. The ode number 5 is the most important, which he kind of simplifies. Not simplifies, he kind of resumes his poetic process and his poetic view of the world. So I'm going to add a little more information about Caeiro. From all of Pessoa's creation, he's the one who has less biographical information. Pessoa wanted him to be the most clear possible and most simple and pristine of all the creations. According to Ricardo Reis, author of Pessoa's creation, Alberto Caeiro's poetry was just a reflection of his life. So everything that he lived, he wrote. And anyway, there was an episode on Alberto Caeiro's life that was when he fell in love. Most of the poems of this phase were the last ones for Pessoa to write about. And according to Ricardo Reis, and the reason why I'm speaking so much of Ricardo Reis is because the way Pessoa created these heteronyms, they would dialogue with themselves. So, as Pessoa say that Caeiro was his master, Caeiro was also the master of Ricardo Reis and had some influence to Álvaro de Campos, but de Campos went another path. And again, about this episode of the love, the poems that were written in this section were called The Amoral Shepherd. They speak about this love episode he had, and there is one line in one of his poems, he says, to love is to think. So he kind of enters in a contradiction. And even though most of his poetic work is kind of close together, there is no contradiction. And as I talked about the clock poem, which is present in The Keeper of Ships, this, I think, 12 poems or 10 poems of the Amorous Shepherd, where, according to Ricardo Reis, are esquecimento, which in English would be translated as he forget about his process. And although it may sound like he was not really true to himself, and he was not, as Ricardo Reis said, the only true poet, having fallen in love and have this weak moment, I think it makes to Cairo be a more real person and increases increases the people view of him, like he's truly a human being. He's not perfect. He's subject to flaws. Pessoa wrote Keeper of Flocks, The Amorous Shepherd, and there is another book on Cairo called The Incollected Poems. They are poems that either are a reaffirmation of what was said in The Keeper of Flocks, or they don't add much. So they were not added in the first book. But anyhow, the last poem he wrote is actually in the Uncollected Poems. I'm going to read the poem now because it's really great. Actually, he did not write per se because he dictated on the day of his death. This translation is not by Richard Zenit, which was the one Drake talked about. I found this one in the internet, but yeah, it's reasonable enough. He says, "It may be the last day of my life. I saluted the sun by raising my right hand, but I didn't really salute it or even say goodbye to it. I showed that I have liked it since before, nothing else." The last line he kind of writes, even though he dictated, is nothing else. I think it's really powerful, and it's the best way he could possibly end his poetic work. Nothing else. It's a reminder of all his poetry. There is nothing else to world except nature itself. There is nothing else to the universe except universe himself. And actually, in one of his words, he says, "I bring a new universe to the universe because I bring the universe to itself." So he kind of has a pagan process like the Greeks had, but with a more pristine, a more primitive way of viewing the world, according to Ricardo Reis again, a more true way to view the world than the Greeks had. And I think this can cover quite well what Cairo's process was. There is a few other good odes, like the Ode 24, the 30, the 16, and the 18, and I would want Drake to read them to complement the general discussion.
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
And just to go on a little bit about Cairo's influences, I feel, and even Pessoa backed this up, that he was very influenced by Walt Whitman, and it's pretty obvious just by reading both poets. But I just wanted to mention, like, when I heard The Learned Astronomer, I feel it has a lot of similarities with the Ode number 2 that I read, because it goes, "When I heard The Learned Astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured, with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out I wandered off by myself, in the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars." I think that gives a pretty good example of how Cairo could be pretty heavily influenced by Walt Whitman, the American.
Yes, that's actually a common influence to Pessoa himself. There is a poem of Álvaro de Campos called, I don't recall it right now, but it is dedicated to Walt Whitman. I'm going to try to find it. Meanwhile, you read one of the words I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I'll read number 16. That's one of my favorites of Cairo. "If only my life were an ox cart that creaks down the road in the morning, very early, and returns by the same road to where it came from in the evening. I wouldn't have to have hopes, just wheels. My old age wouldn't have wrinkles or white hair. When I was of no use, when I was of no more use, my wheels would be removed and I'd end up in a ditch, broken and overturned. Or I'd be made into something different and I wouldn't know what I'd have been made into. But I'm not an ox cart. I'm different. But exactly how I'm different, no one would ever tell me. And that was written March 4th of 1914, like 6 months or so before World War I started.
The old number 18 is a good complement to the old 16. The one he ends with. If you want, I don't have the English translation here, so it's kind of hard to translate the Portuguese. Okay, so the ending is
number 18.
The ending is particularly good.
Yeah.
The last two lines.
Yeah, rather this than to go through life always looking back and feeling regret. He's talking about, I'd rather be a donkey, I'd rather be a river, I'd rather be the dust on the road trampled by the feet of the poor. Yeah.
You should read everything, but okay, it's good. Oh, there's a good ode here, I realized. The ode number 20. If you could read it.
Sure, it's right here. How do you say the river? Tagus? Tagus?
Tejo.
Tejo.
It's better Tejo.
Tejo.
But it's hard to pronounce. Yeah, almost. It has two pronunciations. Depending where you live.
I'll do the American pronunciation, I guess. The Tejo is more beautiful than the river that flows through my village, but the Tejo is not more beautiful than the river that flows through my village, because the Tejo is not the river that flows through my village. The Tejo has enormous ships, and for those who see in everything that which isn't there, its waters are still sailed by the memory of the Caracs. The Tejo descends from Spain and crosses Portugal to pour into the sea. Everyone knows this, but few know what the river of my village is called, and where it goes to, and where it comes from. And so, because it belongs to fewer people, the river of my village is freer and larger. The Tejo leads to the world. Beyond the Tejo, there is America, and the fortune of those who find it. No one ever thought about what's beyond the river of my village. The river of my village doesn't make one think of anything. Whoever is next to it is simply next to it.
I don't know if you know, but o Rio Tejo, the river Tejo, is the biggest one in the Iberic Peninsula. It goes from Spain to Portugal. So he's comparing a small river on his village and the biggest river in Portugal. So the one of his village is better. There is another good ode. You should read the ode number 30. Yeah, is that correct? 30? XXX?
Yeah, that's 30.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know the numbers in English quite well.
That's all right.
I don't know English well, actually.
No, that's all right. I know Portuguese, not at all.
I'm winning.
All right, here it is. Ode number 30. If you want me to have a mysticism, then fine, I have one. I'm a mystic, but only with my body. My soul is simple and doesn't think. My mysticism is not wanting to know. It's living and not thinking about it. I don't know what nature is. I sing it. I live on top of a hill, in a solitary, whitewashed house, and that is my definition.
There is another ode that I pointed out now, is the 39, which also explains a lot of his process. Let me open here in the Portuguese one so I can accompany you. And about that ode, I think together the ode number 2, the 5, and this one here, the 39, are essential and everyone should read in order to understand Cairo better. And so if you can read.
Sure. Mm-hmm. All right, ode number 39. The mystery of things, where is it? Why doesn't it come out to show us at least that it's mystery? What do the river and the tree know about it? What do I, who am no more than they, know about it. Whenever I look at things and think about what people think of them, I laugh like a brook cleanly plashing against a rock. For the only hidden meaning of things is that they have no hidden meaning. It's the strangest thing of all, stranger than all poets' dreams and all philosophers' thoughts, that things are really what they seem to be, and there's nothing to understand. Yes, this is what my senses learned on their own. They have no meanings, they exist. Things are only the hidden meanings of things.
Yeah, I think we gave a good overview of Cairo's poetry. And I want to add that when they recovered the keeper of ships, there was a lot of writings of Ricardo Reis about Cairo's poetry because, as I said earlier, Ricardo Reis was a disciple of Cairo. Anyhow, in one of these preface, one of these comments to the Cairo's work, Ricardo Reis said, "There's not much I can add to this preface. There's not much I can add to the work here. Every ode, this is the keeper of ships. Every ode is essential and should be read. So I think this is what everyone should do. Read all the odes, everything by Cairo. He's really great poet. Lately, I find myself returning to Cairo more and more. Before that, when I was, I don't know, a teenager, I would read a lot of Alberto Campos, especially his last phase. But there is something to Cairo that changed me now. It's really good. And about Cairo's influence on Pessoa. So basically, in the letter of to Adolfo Casais Monteiro, the one in which Pessoa explains his process, he adds that after writing the first poems of the Keeper of Flocks, he wrote a poem called Oblique Rain, but now it was by Pessoa himself. So Oblique Rain are six poems, and they kind of have large influence of the poetry of the 19th century, which is the symbolism. I think the English word is symbolism poetry.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so it's really hard to understand the poem because it starts of Pessoas in a dream, and he sees a port, the one, I think it's PRRT, so where the ships go on, nearby the docks. I don't know the word. Oh, who cares? So basically, he sees that, and then he sees the water, and it kind of transforms, and he sees his reflection in the water, and transforms once again. So it shows. This is only the first one. It shows kind of a fragmentation of his sensations now at the time. Sorry, and overall, after you finish reading all of the Oblique Rain poems, you realize that everything that was written was about Pessoa's sensations at one time, and they were all contradictions, fragments of the reality of a dream. Also, the real and the unreal came together, and he tried to make sense of it. And as he said, it was all written after most of the works of Cairo. So you see how big was the impression Cairo left on him. So it kind of fragmented himself. And about other influence, there is one exchange between Álvaro de Campos and Alberto Caeiro. So at one moment, people, okay, let me speak about the publication of Pessoa's work. Most of the work he wrote was not published when he was alive. The only book he truly published was The Message, or Mensagem, which is a book about Portugal's past and Portugal glory to be. So it's kind of prophetic book about how great Portugal can be if you look at how great Portugal was in the past. Anyhow, the poems he published were mostly published in magazines. And some of these poems published were written by Caeiro. So the name is there, Caeiro and the dates. And if you kind of check some of the Caeiro's poems, you can kind of have the impression that he's a materialistic poet. And so he writes a poem trying to justify he is not a materialistic poet. And he goes on saying, if I speak of nature, that if it is a thing, it's because this is the only way to speak using the main languages and so on. And anyhow, he develops the poem as a response to the critics that were said. And Álvaro de Campos, another of Pessoa's heteronym, when talking about the situation with Caeiro and how he was accused of being a materialistic, and he kind of tried to explain why people would thought of that and what they mean by materialistic. And in the end, the Campus concludes that he was not talking to another people, but rather another universe. So you see how maybe not alienated is not the best word for the situation, but rather how Cairo would stand above all the other poets because he was in another universe. And I think this is really important to understand the influence he had and how you can see him as a great poet.
And just to give a little bit of an idea, I'm going to read Autopsychography, which is a poem he wrote later in his life, April of 1931. And it kind of gives an idea of how he decided his heteronyms worked.
Yes, and it was signed by himself, so it's as Pessoa works.
Yeah, it's not under a heteronym. So I think that's
truly him.
The poet is a faker who's so good at his act, he even fakes the pain of pain he feels in fact. And those who read his words will feel in what he wrote, neither of the pains he has, but just the one they don't. And so around its track, this thing called the heart wins, a little clockwork train to entertain our minds.
I think this is a good poem to explain his process. He says, the poet is a faker or a pretender. And like there's three pains, the pain he has, the pain he feels, and the pain that the reader will feel after reading. So it kind of gives the idea of his writing. To Pessoa, art é fingimento. He wrote that in Portuguese. So art would be to fake, to pretend.
Yeah, and one thing that I remember from the Book of Disquiet, I don't know if you remember this, but he wrote at some point like a logical argument for not writing. It was basically, if you write, you assume what you write is original. And to assume it's original, that means no one else has felt it. So if no one else has felt it, they cannot relate to it. So then you shouldn't write it. Or you can say that what you write about, everyone has felt. So then there's no point in writing it anyway. Because if you put it in language, everyone can relate to the language. So then there's no point in writing. So maybe this poem kind of touches on that the poet must lie and say that either he is the only one that has felt it or everyone has felt it. And when neither of them may or may not be true.
Yeah, that's kind of the poetic creation is on the fringe of being original and fake, you know. This reminded me of a Sylvia Plath interview in which she said when she was really young, the first poems she would read were about the rain, the sun, because she never felt anything good to talk about. So Pessoa has a kind of different intake, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And then, so I guess we can just give like a brief overview of the three major heteronyms that were really big. So the first one, Alberto Caeiro, then Ricardo Reis, and then Álvaro de Campos. And you want to talk a little bit about Caeiro now?
Caeiro was the first one from this tree to appear. Though Pessoa had written a few of Ricardo Reis' poems earlier without knowing it. But Cairo is a shepherd. He is a man of simple life. He lives alone with his flocks, with his sheep, and pretty much is a guy in touch with nature, and he sees nature and talks about nature, and is not fond of having complex things in life. So I don't think he would go well in a big city. So you could talk about, yes, the Álvaro de Campos or Ricardo Reis.
Yeah, so I guess I'll talk about the one I'm less familiar with, Reis.
Yes, and Reis was the second one to come in life. So it was Caeiro, Reis, and de Campos.
Richard Zenith in the Fernando Pessoa and Co., he calls Reis the sad Epicurean, which I think does cut it down, if you have to 3 words, pretty well. He was born in Oporto, which is a relatively large city in Portugal, and moved to the Americas in his 30s, but not much else is precisely defined of his biography. But that does kind of give an idea of his difference between Caeiro and Reis. He was like a more, you could say, cultured person. He wrote a lot of poems. Yeah.
Yes, he was a physician.
Greece. Yeah, physician, more educated. Yeah.
Yes, but Ricardo Reis and Álvaro de Campos all had education, but Cairo did not have, and Cairo ended up being the master of them all.
And the happiest. Yeah.
Yes, this is like ignorance is a bliss, but his intake of life was kind of intellectual to a certain degree. But yeah, he was the happiest.
And I believe Reis was the first one to die also. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think if you go into like the biographies, I think he was the earliest to die too.
I have the book, one book here. I think I can get this information now.
Yeah.
Yes, there's no death day, but only the day they were born. Reis was the oldest one. Reis was the oldest one, and then there was Caeiro and de Campos in the age progression.
I think Pessoa was technically older than all of them, though, right?
Yeah.
He was born in 88. Yeah.
No. Reis was born in 87, so makes Reis 1 year older than Pessoa. Yes.
Oh, I see. But and so I have read some of his shorter poems. Most of Reis they're called odes, as a reference to the classical form, but
yes, he was heavily influenced by the Greeks.
Yeah. And then I'll go on to my favorite one, just a little brief, about Álvaro de Campos. And he is called by Richard Zenith in the same book, the jaded sensationist.
Yes, and let me add, Pessoa wrote and said that de Campos was, and this is Portuguese, o mais histericamente histérico de mim, which is, let me translate the word hysterical because it's a medical condition, a psychological medical condition. My translation not working. Okay. Yeah, it's the most hysterical of me. He has the most hysterically hysterical of me. So he's actually, in my opinion, the closest one to Pessoa. But yeah, go and speak about him, please.
So he was, his biography was, he was born in Tavira, a small town, and he went to study engineering in Scotland and England. So he's like Reis, as you said earlier. He's more educated and more in society than Caeiro was, and he was also sad. And a little about his poems. In the beginning, he focuses on a lot of like you said, ecstatic and like hysterical. He loves the world. He hates the world. He wants to live forever. He wants to die. And he also talks about how this new age of industry, how it's different than what any of the ancients could have known.
Yes.
Which is kind of a difference between Reis and de Campos.
Yes, and the Campos says in his, actually, I don't say the most important ode, but one of the Campos' ode called the Triunfo Ode, he goes on to say, I don't know what Zenith translated, but it was something like, I'm going to talk now about the machines that were really the biggest creation now, and the ancients dismissed them. So he says actually in one line, I want to be complete as a machine is, and if a machine would crush me, I would be happy. Or actually, I would be happy if a machine crushed me. So kind of a guy, but this is one of his face. There is more to it.
Yeah, but like you said, I think between De Campos and Bernardo Suarez, the guy that did the Book of Disquiet, I think those are the two closest to how Pessoa actually thought, in my opinion.
Yes, actually, Pessoa called Bernardo Soares a semi-heteronym. So he's a quasi-heteronym. He's almost a different person, but he's really close to Pessoa. Like when Pessoa, right, he says that De Campos makes a few grammatical mistakes, but Bernardo Soares writes exactly as Pessoa would write. And this is important because Pessoa was a really cultured guy. He not only knew English and Portuguese as mother language because he lived in South Africa, but he was worked long time of his life as translator. He would translate different technical and scientific works to people.
Yeah, and about his relation as far as his life to Suarez, he actually, in one of his letters to one of his friends, I'm not sure how to say his name correctly, Sá Carneiro.
Mário Sá Carneiro. Mário is the first name, Mário Sá Carneiro.
Yeah. He actually wrote a letter to Mario, I'm going to call him Mario, and in that letter, in a postscript, he wrote that he had to copy the letter down to include in the Book of Disquiet because it was such a clear example of his thought. So he wrote that letter sincerely to his friend, but then he copied it and put it in his art as his pseudonym or heteronym Suarez. So I think that just shows how intertwined his heteronyms in his life were and how close Suarez was to his actual thoughts.
Yes, it's like they're fragments of him. And,
yeah.
But, De Campos was, as he said, hysterical. So it was like not a caricature, but rather a bigger version. Not bigger, it's not the best word for that, but like he took a part of him and made it to another person, and it kind of grew. So that is
exaggerated, maybe.
Exaggerated, yes, that's the word. This is what the process was. So we could talk now about his early days. I don't think there is much to add on that, but before he wrote that heteronym, he wrote the one when he was a kid, like 8 years, Chevalier de Pas, which would be the Knight of Nothing. Just a guy in which he would exchange letters. He would write letters to Chevalier de Pas, and the Knight would write letters to Pessoa. This kind of relationship, kind of imaginary friend, but it was the first heteronym we know about.
Yeah, I think partially that was because of his loneliness.
Yeah,
he had, his dad died very early. I think when he was 6, was it?
Yeah, something like that. It was really early because he moved to South Africa because his mother married some fancy Portugal, or I don't know, someone that was high-ranked in the bureaucratic statement. So they moved to South Africa.
Yeah, and then he was very lonely in South Africa.
Yeah.
Partially because he was, just because he was so intelligent, he must have been somewhat different than the kids. But then, of course, he was in a largely English area in Durban, and he was Portuguese. So I think that set him apart even more.
Yeah, and we can talk about later, but I think a lot of problems he had later in life was not only due to his loneliness, but because Mario de Sá Carneiro died, which was his best friend. So,
Yeah.
he finds someone really close to him, and then the guy dies. The guy not dies, the guy kills himself. Yeah, it's kind of not something good to, not something you desire to have someone. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the scholars only found that he wrote letters to Ofelia Quiroz, and he didn't write or pursue any other women. And as far as I know, Sacarneiro was his only like good friend, and that was in 1915, and he died in 1930s, I think. So
No, it was actually, let me get here a chronology. I have the dates here in the book. The Sá Carneiro dies on 16,
1915.
19,
Oh,
19, no,
16.
yeah, it's 15 or 16, I don't know. But it's one of these dates because in the chronology I have here, it just say that he's a lot depressed because of the death of Sá Carneiro, and he writes a lot of esoteric sonnets called the
Yeah.
Steps of the Cross. And he
Yeah.
only met Ophelia like 5 or 4 years later. So he is 5 years without someone close, as close as Mario de Sá would be to him.
Yeah. And like another one of his heteronyms, Alexander Search, and even then when he was 18, he writes about how he has no friends to talk to, how he has no woman to talk to. If I can find it quickly, I
Yeah,
can
but I
give it
don't like
exactly.
to Alexander Search because the guy is like Pessoa is 18, 19, early 20s, and he writes really well in English, which is not his native language, though he ends up on South Africa really young. It shows how bad my writing is. Yeah, it's not good to think about search now.
I think I found it. Oh no, this isn't in Alexander Search. This is in Charles Robert Anon, which is another one
But
of his
yeah,
heteronyms from
it
that
was
same
at the
era.
same time. They were two
Huh?
biggest ones. No, at that time he wrote Pessoa, the Alexander Sturge, and this other guy Anon, and
Yeah.
they were kind. I think Alexander Sturge was kind of a proto Álvaro de Campos, an early version of the Campos, but I don't think Alexander Sturge can be considered as heteronym at the other three we talk about because he's really a lot like Pessoa. But again, he was a teenager, so there is a lot of things happening at that time. So you end up having, and if he's a teenager and he writes under Alexander Sturge, which is also a teenager at that time, so it's bound to be similar and not really different as when you are an adult.
Yeah, but there is a quote by Emile Cioran who said, everything I thought when I was 18 was correct, and the rest of my life was just confirmation.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's kind of true, I think. But I don't know. Every year that passes, I look at the year before and say, I was really dumb at that time. I think at least I am growing. I think so. But like when I was 18, I would not like to read Cairo. I was more fond of the
yeah.
campus. But now I'm only reading Cairo mostly. But once again, kind of 2 years ago, and 1 year and a half, I was kind of saying Cairo is the only thing you need to read of Pessoa. And now this year, I'm reading the campus more than I was on the past years and liking him once again. So
Yeah.
yes, I'm not really. I'm full of paradoxal feelings like Pessoas. Yes, talking about paradox, it's a big deal of Pessoa's work to have this kind of contradictions and contrasts.
Yeah, that's true. But then again, it's also trying to clear paradoxes. Like
Yes.
his poem by Cairo, where he talks about why do people think the world should be different than it is? If it was different, it would be different.
Yeah,
You know, that's like a clearing away of like messiness, of like paradox.
yes, it kind of clears the way, but it doesn't solve anything. It adds to the problem, but it's an answer to it. Yes. Okay. So I think we can talk about his return to Portugal after he leaves South Africa. He goes to Portugal and he begins to write in a few magazines. And you know, in Portugal there is a writer called Camões. He's the equivalent of Shakespeare to the English-speaking world and to Cervantes to the Spanish-speaking world. So he's the greatest. I think he was. Now it's Pessoa, but at that time he was the greatest Portuguese writer. And then Pessoa began to write some prose pieces of criticism and says, now in Portugal there is no one close to Camões. And since Camões died, there is no one to be at least close to him. But he says, someone will be. And even though he never said it will be him, it is clear that he thinks he will be the next big writer in Portugal. And actually, there is one letter he says, after I win the Nobel Prize, I will introduce the Campos, Ricardo Reis, and Caeiro. So, and then everyone will see how little I am.
Another thing, I mean, that's a good point, but like at the very end of the first part of the Book of Disquiet, here I'll just read this quote because it's so interesting talking about paradoxes. So at one point he thinks he's up there with Camões, you know, like to an extent, but then at another point, here I'll just read this, and night will fall on us, and the coach will pull up. I enjoy the breeze I'm given, and the soul I was given to enjoy it with, and I no longer question or seek. If what I write in the Book of Travelers can, when read by others at some future date, also entertain them on their journey, then fine. If they don't read it or are not entertained, that's fine too. So that gives an idea that he doesn't care whether or not he's famous or whether or not anyone thinks he's good. So it's interesting.
I think he knows he's good and he will receive recognition sometime. And I think he did. Yes. You know, one important thing to show how much recognition he had, after he said that everyone in Portugal was bad, pretty much every writer, and then there is an opportunity to him to enter in a literary prize. And at that time he's working on a book called Message, which would be the next book about Portugal, because the first book about Portugal history is Os Lusíadas by Camões. So the second one would be Message by Pessoa. And he's working on this poem. He's like 10 years working and decide to put into the prize, the contest. And then he was not really well seen, and he did not receive the first place. But the prize was only to the first place. But his book was so good, even though no one liked him at the time, no one of the critics, he ended up receiving a prize, even though it was not supposed to have a prize to the second place. So yes, he was, even though no one, not say no one, but like the intelligentsia of the time did not like him, he was really good and someone had to acknowledge that. But you know, his peers, other young writers, all realized how good Pessoa was and saw him like he truly was a great writer.
Yeah, but it's just a shame. The Book of Disquiet, it wasn't even published until after he had died. They found, what was it, like 100,000 pages of manuscript in a trunk in his room after he died, and then now they're just publishing all of it. It's crazy.
Yes, and when they find it, a few days later, I don't know if it was truly a few days later, but after he died, his brother went to give a speech after everyone sees how great his work was, and he says, no one would realize that Fernando Pessoa, a guy that everyone was fond of, would turn out to be a genius. So he kind of, even though he wrote a lot, he published some of his works in magazines, but he never showed the full extent of his works. And you know, the Book of Squad, I think it was not published when he was alive because he never felt that it was complete. There is a lot of manuscripts on the box. It's not a box, but I don't know the word in English.
Trunk.
That it was like a trunk, right? So, Book of the Squad in Portuguese would be Livro do Desassossego, which L and D. And a few manuscripts would have L of D, just saying this is part of the Book of the Squad, and some would have L of D and then an interrogation mark because he was not quite sure of if it was from the work or it wasn't. And if you pick, in Portuguese it's easier to see because there is a lot of Pessoa's published works, but if you pick two different Book of the Squad from two publishers, it may be different. The order can be different, and one has more poems than the other one. But even though we can't say for sure what the final version would be, it is anything you can grab your hand on to read, it's good to read.
Actually, I just wanted to see what the very last line is, and this is the one by Richard Zenith, just to see. And it's actually interesting going along with the idea that it doesn't have an ending. So this is the very end, and it's titled A Voyage I Never Made. To sail without ever landing doesn't have a landing place. To never arrive implies never arriving ever.
Let me get the Portuguese one so I can kind of. I did not listen to it, sorry, because I was finding the book. Yeah, but I think I remember what you are talking about.
Well, basically, it's just if you never have a plan to finish, then there is no finish.
Yeah, but I think he did not have a plan to finish, or maybe.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. Because I'm still trying to find. I'm not listening properly. English is hard. Yeah. So it was like he's saying, "I will never finish." Yeah, kind of a confession. Anyhow, what else we can talk about? Oh yes, one thing we did not mention. Like there was kind of a renaissance to Portugal at the time, and it was all not planned by Pessoa, but he had a large participation in changing the Portuguese intellectual landscape. He was member of a magazine called The Orfeo. He was one of the creators. And only 2 volumes were published of this magazine, or 2 numbers, sorry. But it ended up adding to a whole generation of writers influenced by that magazine. It's really great.
Yeah, I looked up how much they cost, and it's like $10,000. I tried to see if I could buy one, but you can't, basically, unless you're super rich.
Yeah, it's really important work to Portugal history. Well, I think we can proceed talking about the heteronomies a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm going to talk about the process of creation. You know, there is a lot of what Pessoa said. You know, we talk about how artists are to pretend to fake the creation is between the original and the fake, but I was reading a bit about Pessoa's explanation of his own work, and apparently a lot of what he said and tried to explain is not really concise with the reality, because he made up a few things. And one of these things that may be true or not is the triumphal day, which he says that Cairo appeared to him and he began to write, and then he took Ricardo Reis from that episode, that day, and then the Campos too in the opposite direction of Ricardo Reis. And it's kind of funny how he the sort of artistic creation goes on, and to fake, to pretend to be original or not, reflects on his life. So his life is a constant, not theater, but even his life is a artistical creation. You know that Spanish, and I don't know the word in English, but I forgot his name too. But he said that life is a theater. You know, it's kind of things. I think Pessoa kind of lived that, truly lived that. Okay, so anyway, about Cairo, we talk a little bit about him, and I don't think we can add much regarding his creation without talking about the odes. But I want you to read the ode number 2, just to give a good information of Cairo's rising.
All right. And this is by the translation by Richard Zenith from.
Yeah.
It's actually in both the Fernando Pessoa and Co. and A Little Larger the Entire Universe. Only
Yes,
3 poems are shared, and that's one of them. Number 2. Number 2.
Yes, I would want to add that if you want to find that translation, find one by Zenith, because yes, I think he's the biggest Pessoa scholar in the world, and I was trying to find a few translations for Alberto Caeiro's poetry, and there was one which was completely wrong. The guy forgot to add a not, so it changed the meaning completely. But anyway, find the Zenith translation, it's good.
And this is the number 2 from The Keeper of Sheep. My gaze is clear like a sunflower. It is my custom to walk the roads, looking right and left, and sometimes looking behind me. And what I see at each moment is what I never saw before, and I'm very good at noticing things. I'm capable of feeling the same wonder a newborn child would feel if he noticed that he'd really and truly been born. I feel at each moment that I've just been born into a completely new world. I believe in the world as in a daisy, because I see it, but I don't think about it, because to think is to not understand. The world wasn't made for us to think about it. To think is to have eyes that aren't well, but to look at it and to be in agreement. I have no philosophy. I have senses. If I speak of nature, it's not because I know what it is, but because I love it. And for that very reason, because those who love never know what they love, or why they love, or what love is. Love is innocence, and the sum of innocence is not thinking. And that was written in March 8, 1914, before World War I.
Yes, I think it has some good lines that explains the general idea of Cairo. Like, I don't have philosophy, I have senses or feelings. I don't know how it was translated.
Senses.
And sense. And the other one, in what I see, each moment is what I never saw before. So, and also, to think is to be seeking of the eye. Cairo completely dismisses philosophers and some poets that try to find inner meaning of things, try to maybe overthinking is not the correct term, but to Cairo would be like people who overthink things, which is to a normal person would be to think about something. He just wants to have a pristine, primitive intake of life, a kind of paganism close to the Greeks, but I think more pure. And
one of my favorite lines by Pablo Picasso, you know, when he went to the Lascaux caves where they have cave drawings from 30,000 years ago, he said that we have learned nothing. And at that time, he was probably considered the best painter in the world, if not the best, at least the most technically skilled. And to hear that, you know, Pessoa, writing as Cairo, thinks that, you know, thinking and the buildup of civilization through like philosophies and things is to be sick, and then to hear Picasso say, "We've learned nothing," I think it's a really interesting point to be made of like the modernists in general of the early 20th century.
Yes, it's kind of a new take on life, challenging completely the foundations of the world. Yeah, it's great.
All right, and now I'll just make some brief comments about Reis. He was, I think I'll read just one poem of his. I think it gives a good idea of his viewpoint. It's a short one too. It's called Lips Red from Wine, which is also the first line because a lot of his poems weren't titled when they were found. So, like many other poets, they just take the first line. Lips red from wine, white foreheads under roses, naked white forearms lying on the table. May this be the picture wherein speechless Lydia will forever be inscribed in the minds of the gods. Rather this than life as earthly men live it, full of the black dust they raise from the roads. The gods, by their example, help only those who seek to go nowhere but in the river of things. Well, I think this gives a really good view of the main themes he talks about. The wine, the white forehead and forearms, which kind of brings to mind statues, the old Greek statues. The dust of the road, which is a contrast to Caeiro, because he wanted to be the dust of the road that the poor people step on, and
yes,
Reis wanted to be above it. He wanted to be above the earthly men.
Yes, maybe he wanted too much and was not happy because of that. There is like this Greek influence on him. And the Portuguese title is actually Bocas Roxas de Vinho. And Roxas is like, it's not the Spanish rojas, but it's purple in English. But they translated as red, and I think it's good too.
And anyway, one thing I think to be said is this was written in August of 1915, which is almost a year after World War I started.
Checking the dates is important to see the influence of the events on Pessoa. But I think I don't think he really wanted to kind of add the events to his poetry, but I think it's ought to have some influence. Anyhow,
well, they had to have an effect, like
yes, sure.
And also, I think that was before the time, but this is around the time his friend was not doing well, Sacarneiro, and I think it's near the time that his friend killed himself.
Yeah, and yes, but about Ricardo Reis, there is a lot of information to be, because from all his creations, Caeiro is the one who has less biographical information given by Pessoa. He did not say much. He said he was born in Lisbon as a sad day, I don't know, a sad day, like in a given day, I don't know which one was. But most of explanation on Caeiro is made by Ricardo Reis. So a lot of his poetry was influenced by Caeiro. In order to understand it, you need to really read Caeiro before to see the progression on Reis poetry. But I don't know much about it, except one or two poems. There is one poem he says he underlines in the way of Caeiro to show how Caeiro influenced him, but it's not the one I like the most. I think I don't read much of Reis because this kind of Greek influences, it was big on when earlier, but now I just diminish. Not diminish, but I just ignore.
Well, honestly, for me, I don't know a lot of the references he makes to Greek mythology and Roman mythology. So, like in that last poem when he referenced Lydia, I mean, I think Lydia was, I don't even know really. So I lost that whole illusion.
Yes, it's like reading Ezra Pound Cantos without knowing the background before it. It will not work, you know. Yeah, we didn't read the Greeks. No, but we didn't read much.
We should have started with the Greeks, dude.
Yeah. I think you should start with anyone should start with Pessoa. Yeah, it's better.
Yeah, I agree. And then
Yeah. So
I think we should just move on to De Campos, honestly, because
yeah,
he's my favorite, and he was your favorite when you were younger. You said so.
yes, yet it was. But now I'm growing fonder of him. I don't know. It's kind of a roller coaster of emotions. Yeah, Pessoa is
So
great.
Richard Zenith calls De Campos the jaded sensationist, and as you said earlier, he is like a hyperbolic or exaggerated version, at least in the beginning of Pessoa, because like as I look here in my selected poems, a lot of his poems have exclamation marks, and
Yes, especially
it's like
especially
exuberant.
yeah, especially in the middle of his life, because it's kind of he actually has three phases if you look, but most of his poems are divided in the second or third phase, and the second phase is about machines, power, velocities, and because it has a lot of new things going on, it's harder to explain on paper. So he would use a lot of onomatopoeias and exclamation mark and trying to
Yeah,
convey the sound of the things on the poem. So it's really hyperbolic, exaggerated.
yeah, and it's weird. It's weird to read them out loud. So I don't even know
It
how to
is
do
actually
like
not
that
really
R.
important. Like it's really that. It's like
Like
a
a
motor
cat.
starting. No, it's like a dog. R it is dog letter. You know, there is some
A
Shakespeare
dog letter.
play. I don't know. Yes, that references it. The Romans called it the I don't know the late Latin name, but it was to explain that the R had the sound a wolf or a dog would make, like no,
Oh, like a
or
growl. Okay.
yes, and like a motor starting.
But one of my favorite lines, like almost every day, I think of quotes from Pessoa. One of them is from Cairo. If it was different, it would be different, and that is all. One of them is from the Book of Disquiet. I enjoy the breeze, and I enjoy my soul that I'm given to enjoy it with. And then another quote is from De Campos. Well, two of them really. To hell with life and having to live it. I don't even read the book in my bed. And then my heart is a little larger than the entire universe.
I think the one I really remember from Pessoa, from Álvaro de Campos, is from Tabacaria, tobacco shop. I don't know how it is in the English, but I find a translation now. But in Portuguese
Yeah,
is,
tobacco shop.
yeah, em português is, não sou nada, não posso querer ser nada, nunca serei nada. A parte disso, guarda em mim todos os sonhos do mundo. In English is, I am nothing, I will never be anything. I cannot want to be anything. Apart from this, I have in me all the dreams of the world. This
Yeah,
is
that's
yeah,
great.
this is like
So
it's
the
amazing.
Zenith translation is I am nothing. I'll always be nothing. I can't want to be something, but I have in me all the dreams of the world.
Yeah, I think this translation is better because nothing, anything in Portuguese can be said with one word called nada. So he uses nada in the three first verses, but this translation I read, it's nothing and the anything and anything. But yeah, but this one is better as translation. It captures more the feelings. But this is all from the late phase of Álvaro de Campos. He starts like a decadent and then goes the futuristic, there is sensations, and then go on to the pessimism, which is the ones that have the greater poems because they're kind of the romantics but better.
Yeah. I love the ending of the tobacco shop because it's just so good. So it says the man has come out of the tobacco shop, putting change into his pocket. Ah, I know him. It's unmetaphysical Estevez. The tobacco shop owner has come to the door. As if by divine instinct, Estevez turns around and sees me. He waves hello. I shout back, hello, Estevez. And the universe falls back into place without ideals or hopes. and the owner of the tobacco shop smiles.
Yes, if you read the second phase of Cairo, like Triumphal Ode and the Maritime Ode, the exaltation of machines, and then you read that and you realize that this progression, even though he's pessimistic, he not dislike, but he has not so good view of life. He is actually much more prolific in poetry. He writes better.
Yeah, I think he comes to appreciate the small things, like
Yes, maybe it was Cairo's influence on him. I don't know, but that is like, but he gets on sometimes really awful because there is one poem called "Poem in a Straight Line." Do you know about that one?
I don't think so.
He's going on saying, "I'm a vile person," and I'm going to try to find it in English because it's a really great poem and you should read it. But he had let down a down view of himself. I never knew a soul who would receive so much beating as I would have. Like I suffered a lot and so on. But I'm going to send you an English version so you can read. Let me find one first.
I'll just read one of my poems I like of De Campos in the meantime. It's called I Have a Bad Cold. This was written in 1931, which is a little after the tobacco shop. I have a bad cold, and everyone knows how bad colds throw the whole universe out of kilter. They turn us against life. They make us sneeze, even metaphysically. I've wasted the whole day blowing my nose. My head hurts all over. A sorry state for a minor poet. Today I'm truly a minor poet. What I used to be was a wish. It snapped. Goodbye forever, fairy queen. You had wings of sunlight, and here I am plodding along. I won't get well unless I lie down in bed. I've never been well except when lying down in the universe. Excusez de peu. What a terrible physical cold. I need truth and some aspirin.
Yeah, that's great.
I never knew a soul who ever took a licking. My friends have all been champions at everything. And I, so often vulgar, so often obscene, so often vile. I, so deliberately parasitic, unforgivably filthy. I, so often without patience to take a bath. I, who have been so ridiculous, so absurd, tripping up in public on the carpet of etiquette. So grotesque and mean, submissive and insolent, who've been insulted and not said a word, and when putting a word and growing still more ridiculous. I who strike chambermaids as laughable, I who feel porters wink sarcastically, I who have been scandalous about money, borrowing and not paying back, I who, when the time came to fight, ducked as far as I could out of punching range, I who go into a sweat over the slightest thing. I'm convinced no one's better than I at this sort of game.
It's a great line.
And that reminds me, do you remember that line from, I think it's Opiary? I'm atoning for a crime in a suitcase that my grandfather committed for fun. That's a good one. I always think of that. And yeah.
You know, Pierre, the line I always think at is the one he says, I pretend I studied engineering. It's like, it's like daily I think of that when I go to school, to the university. Instead, I think,
dude, you should write that line like on a bathroom stall somewhere. See if anyone knows it.
I actually will. I'm going to be a vandal. But it's for poetry. Like people do crazy things for science, I would do for poetry. Yeah.
And then there was another line about, he says about committing crimes, or like I'm doing bad things, not committing crimes, but I think it's in the Book of Disquiet. It's where he says, when you're walking down the street and you see a homeless man and you have change in your pocket, but you just keep walking, it's not because you're evil. It's simply because you don't want to unbutton your coat pocket.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's these subtle things that he he notices, and it's in like Caeiro. He says, every day I see new things. Every minute of every day, everything is new, and I'm very
Yeah.
good at noticing things.
The old number 2. Yes.
Yeah.
But I think this is what makes a writer a good writer, and in poetry especially, seeing this kind of subtle moments and translating it to writing.
Yeah. It's like we said earlier, it's the things that maybe hasn't happened to you, but in a way has happened to everyone.
Yes, to fake the.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of when I shift from Portuguese to English or to English from Portuguese, I kind of have a delay time. I was going to remember the first line of autopsychography, but I went to remember the English one. I kind of went in the I don't know the voice. O poeta é um fingidor, finge tão completamente a fingir que é dor, a dor que devera ser. The poet is a pretender. He pretends so well.
Fake. Yeah.
A fake who's so good at his act, he even fakes the pain of the pain he feels in fact. So he fakes not only the pain but with sensations and so on.
And the only pain you can feel is the pain you haven't experienced. I think that's one of the lines. I was thinking of that too. It's where, maybe you haven't experienced a chambermaid laughing at you, because I don't even know if they have chambermaids anymore. But you can feel that pain, and yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of what literature is about. It's having emotions and sensations from other people's experience, or even making one's own experience and sensations. I think you could read the Lisbon Revisited, the 923 version, or because it's a really great poem. He's like saying, I don't want help, let me alone. And I think it's a good message he has, and people sometimes forget about letting some people alone. Sometimes you need to be quiet and linger on your pain, on your commiseration, if you may think about that.
Here, let me find it. Okay, here we go. Yeah, Lisbon Revisited, 1923. And then he also did write another Lisbon Revisited, but I think the first one's I like the first one anyway. So this is Lisbon Revisited. No, I don't want anything. I already said I don't want anything. Don't come to me with conclusions. Death is the only conclusion. Don't offer me aesthetics. Don't talk to me of morals. Take metaphysics away from here. Don't try to sell me complete systems. Don't bore me with breakthroughs of science. Of science, my God, science. Of science, of the arts, of modern civilization. What harm did I ever do to the gods? If you've got the truth, you can keep it. I'm a technician, but my technique is limited to the technical sphere, apart from which I'm crazy, and with every right to be so. With every right to be so, do you hear? Leave me alone, for God's sake. You want me to be married, futile, conventional, and taxable. You want me to be the opposite of this, the opposite of anything. If I were someone else, I'd go along with you all. But since I am what I am, lay off. Go to hell without me, or let me go there by myself. Why do we have to go together? Don't grab me by the arm. I don't like my arm being grabbed. I want to be alone. I already told you that I can only be alone. I'm sick of you wanting me to be sociable. Oh, blue sky, the same one I knew as a child, perfect and empty, eternal truth. Oh, gentle, silent, ancestral Teju, tiny truth in which the sky is mirrored. Oh, sorrow revisited, Lisbon of bygone days today. You give me nothing. You take nothing from me. Your nothing I feel is me. Leave me in peace. I won't stay long, for I never stay long. And as long as silence in the abyss hold off, I want to be alone.
I want to be alone. Yeah, that's powerful. He has a lot of great poems like that.
Yeah. And one thing I thought of actually, Recently I've been really into like Chinese poets. I'm not sure if I told you much about it, but honestly, a lot of Pessoa's like lines and ideas remind me of those Chinese poets from the 700s, the Tang Dynasty,
Yeah.
and like kind of along with that, there's the Japanese haiku writer Basho. I don't know how to say his name.
I mean, no, I don't know. I think I probably read something by him because it's kind of that guy who sometimes people will, yeah, copy and paste that haikus on for Shan, the literature board, or not.
Well, do you know
I don't like.
Robbie Basho, the guitarist and singer? He got his last name from that Japanese poet.
I don't.
But
I think I probably.
anyway, so the poem that made
Okay.
me think of this, like at this time, Pessoa lived in Lisbon, and he was thinking about how Lisbon was. And the most famous poem by Basho it's really short, it's a haiku. It goes, "In Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo call, I long for Kyoto." So, some particular
Yeah.
thing, and I also thought of Oswara Lima with this. When he was in Kyoto, he longed for Kyoto. When Pessoa was in Lisbon, he revisited Lisbon.
Yes. That's
Yeah,
that's a good connection.
yeah.
That is.
And then I think it'd be good if we read Swara Lima and then maybe wrap this up because it's getting quite long. But
Yes, we could talk a little about Pessoa's relationship with Ophelia. What I don't know, it's a kind of an episode. Not much was made about that, though it had influence on the heterons. But okay, so
yeah,
basically, what I think we can explain or tell a good information is that Pessoa's process of creation, the heteron, the personas he made were so strong in his life that they even ended up with his love affair. So to see how
yeah,
big, how serious he treated his production. And actually, Álvaro de Campos wrote to a journal in Portugal at the time, a newspaper actually, the word in English is, and criticized someone who kind of, was a critic on Mário de Sá Carneiro works, and the Campos says something like, I would not speak about much about what you wrote on the Sá Carneiro because I don't think you know the language I speak. So the guy
yeah.
was criticizing the importance of that.
I feel so bad that I just feel like Pessoa was just like he was just like annihilated his whole life. Like in this poem we just read, the poem in a straight line. He was made fun of. His friend killed
Yeah.
himself. The woman he loved wrote letters and then didn't talk to him. And I mean, if we want to, like, I have here the selected prose of Fernando Pessoa, translated by Richard Zenith, and so like here it says, Pessoa had one romantic relationship with 2 chapters, but whether he was ever in love is an open and probably unanswerable question. In the 51 letters he wrote to Ophelia Quiroz over a 9-month period in 1920 and over a 4-month period in 1929 to 1930, Pessoa declares his ardent affection and physical desire in strong enough terms to convince us, at least in the earlier letters, that he was smitten. And it does really, like, if you read these letters, he calls her my darling baby. It's almost 4 a.m. and I've just given up trying to fall asleep because he's thinking of her, and he wants to imagine what she was doing earlier in the day.
Yeah,
And then,
about losing sleep, it reminds me of one of passage in Journey to the End of the Night or Voyage to the End of the Night. I think the English translation is that from Céline.
yeah,
And there is a bit which he says, if you want to see if someone's okay, just ask to him if he can sleep at night. If he can, then everything is fine. And it's kind of, if you have insomnia, you have problems in your life. And talking about insomnia, there is actually two poems with the theme in Pessoa's writings. One from Alexander Search and one from the Campos. But I think we kind of went too much about them and should wrap it up with Hora Lima and then Death is the Bend of the Road, which are two good poems by Pessoa himself, so Pessoa, not his creations.
All right, so I'll at least read a part of Hora Lima because it's 6 pages long or so. But so Hora Lima is a piano piece. The voice on the radio returns, announcing in an exaggerated drawl, "And now, Hora Lima." I stop smiling, my heart stops beating, and from the unconscious receiver, that sweet and accursed melody breaks forth. My soul loses itself in a suddenly resurrected memory. The wooded slope shimmered under the great African moon. The living room in our house was large, and everything between it and the sea was lit up by the dark brilliance of that gigantic moon. But only I stood by the window. My mother was at the piano and played that very same Hora Lima. My God, how distant and irrevocably lost all that is. What has become of her noble bearing, of her dependably smoothing voice, of her full and affectionate smile? What there is today to remind me of all that is this melody, exactly the same melody, still playing on the radio. None other than Hora Lima. Her graying hair was so lovely in the light, and I never thought she would die and leave me at the mercy of who I am. She died, but I'll always be her little boy, because no one, for his mother, is ever a man. And even through tears, my memory still preserves the perfect medallion image of that yet more perfect profile. My forever childish heart weeps when I remember you, mother, so Roman and already graying. I see your fingers at the keyboard, and the moonlight outside shines eternally in me. In my heart you play without ceasing, Hora Lima. Did the little ones go right to sleep? Yes, right to sleep. This girl here is almost asleep, and smiling as you spoke, you continued playing, attentively playing Hora Lima. Then I'll skip ahead to the end to give the finale. The veil of tears does not blind me. Crying, I see what that music gives me, the mother I had, that home from long ago, the child I was, the horror of time because it flows, the horror of life because it only kills. I see and fall asleep, and in my torpor, forgetting myself, I see my mother playing the piano, and those small white hands, whose caresses will never again comfort me, play carefully and calmly, Hora Lima. Ah, I see everything clearly. I'm back there once more. I turn away my eyes that had been gazing at the uncommon moon outside. But wait, my mind rambles, and the music is over. I ramble as I've always rambled, and how we rambled, with no inner certainty about who I am, nor any real faith or firm rule. I ramble, I create my own eternities, with the opium of memory and abandon. I enthrone fantastical queens, but have no throne for them to sit on. I dream because I wallow, in the unreal river of that recollected music. My soul is a ragged child, sleeping in a dusky corner. All I have of my own, in true waking reality, are the tatters of my abandoned soul, and my head that's dreaming next to the wall. Oh, isn't there, mother, dear mother, some God to save all this from futility, some other world in which this lives on? I continue to ramble. Everything is illusion. Hora Lima. Shatter, heart.
A great poem. This was right like 3 months before he died, but I like to think it was the last poem he wrote because it kind of closed great his poetic his poems, because the first poem he wrote when he was 7 years old was to his mother, and then the last one was having. It only happened because of his mother, so finishes a cycle. I think it really great to ignore everything he wrote before this particular poem to make the history better.
Yeah. And one thing I thought of, it's just all the modernists, along with Pessoa, all the greats, they all wrote about the same things. Like Proust's great work is In Search of Lost Time. And this poem brings that idea clearly to mind. And his precision of daily events connects, Robert Musil and James Joyce, the stream of consciousness, the everyday events, over a short period of time that takes up 1,000 pages. And it's just a definite fact that Pessoa is among those greats and at their level, at least, if not higher.
Yes, even the Campos wrote he turns it back to his childhood. There's a poem called Anniversary, birthday in English. I think anniversary is a word too, but he kind of look at early times in which everything was better. But it's not because better, it's kind of a lost time. Anyhow, about Pessoa being great, I think if you ask to any Portugal intellectual now, what are the 5 best writers in the Portuguese language of the last centuries, they will say Pessoa, and only that, because he can cover the 5 places at once. Pessoa, Caeiro, de Campos, Reis, and Bernardo Soares. He was really great, and he produced a lot of things and managed to meet it out in a good history together, and still being concise and not being complete to a sense. Like when I was a teenager, you have this kind of reading Lord Byron, Percy Shelley. I was reading the Portuguese, the Brazilian equivalent of it, and then came Pessoa with the Campos and changed everything. And now came Pessoa with Cairo and changed everything again. So he managed to change me everything twice. This is kind of a really great thing if you can produce a literary work that can give different impressions but make big different impressions in someone.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, like I've been reading Pessoa for almost 2 years now, and the thing that makes someone great is how they affect the youth and how they can influence and make better like late teenagers, early adults. And as you just said, I think Pessoa is one of the best at that, at least that I have seen. He's one of my favorites by far, and I read his poems and think about them daily. It's just we're lucky to have had him.
Yes, truly.
Well, I think we're go ahead and end it here. We've rambled long enough.
Yeah.
So right now we'll just exit, and we'll end it with a rendition of Aswar Alima.
I think we should end. Yes. The last sentence Pessoa wrote in English was, "I know not what tomorrow will bring." And I think this is suitable to the end of this episode. I know not what tomorrow will bring. Yes, it's a great sentence to be the last one you wrote. Like the last sentence Cairo wrote is also memorable. Yeah. So people read Pessoa, he's really great, and I think it's that. And thank you to Jacob because he's recording this episode and we will edit later. Yeah, you need to acknowledge him.
Thanks, Jacob.
Jacob
deserves all the credit for this.
Yes, he do not want to speak. Yeah, he's mute.
Yeah, okay, he always makes up excuses for why he can't speak. But it's okay. We'll let it slide. All right.
And
thanks
now
for listening, everybody.
Thank you. That's a wrap. Thank you.